Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Bandazy, and I'm chairing the July 14, 2023 meeting of the Legislative Commission on the Environmental and Health Effects of Per and Polyfluorinated Chemicals. And I'm calling this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending a lovely Friday afternoon in New Hampshire with no sun again. For our meeting. We do have a quorum, so Dr. Woods, welcome. We can take up the minutes of our previous meetings. First, minutes of the May 12, 2023 meeting. And if anyone has questions or comments, if not, we'll entertain a motion to approve as amended. Or I will make that motion.
There's a few typos. There's a few typos in there still. I don't know the best way to address them.
Are they substantive typos, Laureen?
Well, like under comments, under DHHS comments, the part that we crossed out, there's a whole, it looks like whoever's taking the notes was very clever and used talk to text maybe or something like that, because it says, for me, I was nominated to be a community liaison on the NASA project. So no affiliation with NASA. It's NASEM is what that should read. And then down from there a little bit, then SDR, and it should be ATSDR. So there's a couple of pieces in there that I think other stuff doesn't really matter, but those acronyms should be corrected.
Is there a page number on those corrections?
I'm looking at the minutes draft here. I pulled it up on an iPad. It's right underneath the part that was, there's a whole bunch that was crossed off there under DHHS.
In the DHHS
update
section?
Yeah, and then it starts with Representative Nancy Murphy talked about provider education. And then right under that, it says comments that I made, and it said I was nominated to be a community liaison on the NASA project. That would be like mind blowing, huh? So that should be NASEM. It's just right there. And then you just go down there about 12, 15 lines, and then you see we need the SDR from the CDC, and that should read the ATSDR.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. Those are substantive.
Yeah, there's another section again that it's a little whooshy, but that doesn't really matter. This matters.
Michelle?
So I think there's some confusion because there's a couple versions of those minutes that have been distributed. I had provided updates on the DHHS update, which is basically what I had provided during the May meeting, which is in written form, which is basically what I read. And I think that you, Chris, I think you sent a revised version around after, so there might be two versions that folks are looking at. And so I would say that we go with the most, the version that has the revisions in it.
And at the end of that file name, it says that it's revised June 9th of 2023. So, all right. Would someone like to make a motion to approve those minutes as amended, and we'll get those two corrections made that you mentioned, Laureen?
I have another correction, if I may. This
Okay,
is
that's
Rich Lascelles from
Rich, is that you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did attend the May meeting by phone. I did not attend the June meeting, but the May meeting I did attend, and I am not listed as an attendee.
Okay. All right. Any other amendments to the May minutes? Okay, if not, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes as amended. Motion by, and Nancy, did you second?
Sure.
Okay. I heard you. All right, all those in favor, please raise your hands.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. On to the June 9 meeting minutes. Comments or corrections to those? If everyone's okay with them, then I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Nancy and seconded by Ron. All in favor, please raise your hand. You, any opposed? All right, that passes. And Mike, I note your abstention.
Thank you.
I think. Is that correct? Yes, as a staff member. All right, moving on to the DES update, Mike.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm here happy to provide the DES update for this meeting. Start as we usually do with the Air Resources Division update. With respect to permitting activities, on May 19th of this year, DES issued a draft state permit to operate with supporting application review summary, calculations, and DES modeling memo. These documents reflect the agency's review of all currently open applications submitted by Saint-Gobain Performance Plastics and address all applicable and associated regulatory requirements for the facility. A public notice inviting comments on the draft permit was published in the New Hampshire Union Leader and the Merrimack Journal on May 21st. DES conducted a public hearing for Wednesday, June 21st at 6 p.m. at the Merrimack High School Little Theater at 38 McElwain Street in Merrimack. In addition, the agency partnered with Merrimack TV to live stream the event. And DES extended the written comment period to July 5th and is currently reviewing the comments and preparing a document called the Director's Decision and Findings of Fact. And that document will outline the public comments and department's responses to those comments. A final decision on the applications is due August 16th, and all related documentation, presentations, and the recording of the hearing can be found on the DES Air Resources website. And there will be a hot link to that in the minutes for this update. There are no specific updates regarding inspection activities. Regarding stack testing activities, the next stack test is required to take place by September 2023 and has tentatively been planned for the week of Labor Day. A pre-test protocol will be required to be submitted to the agency at least 30 days prior to the scheduled stack test date. And then with respect to bypass operations, since the last update to the commission, the department received one notification of a bypass event that was caused by a brief interruption of electric utility service that was caused by a lightning strike. The company notified the department by email on June 15th and sent a permit deviation report related to the bypass event on the 19th of June. The bypass of the RTO occurred on June 14th and it occurred from 8:02 p.m. to 8:11 p.m., so approximately 9 minutes. And that's the Air Resources Division's update. Moving to the Waste Management Division's update, start talking about POET system installations. So Saint-Gobain's contractor Second Wind Water Systems started the POET installation process for residents within the towns of Bedford and Merrimack in November of last year. At this time, nearly all homeowners in Bedford and Merrimack have been notified of their eligibility to set up the pre-installation inspection. In May of this year, Saint-Gobain finalized a contract with Culligan Water to complete POET installations in Londonderry, Litchfield, and Hudson. And as of June 30th, a total of 653 notification letters have been sent to 658 eligible property owners. Then the first POET system was installed on December 15th of last year, and as of June 30th, 276 POET systems have been installed. Second Wind's currently installing systems at a rate of approximately 10 systems per week. Culligan Water started their inspections the week of June 12th and began POET system installations the week of the 19th. Culligan Water is anticipating being able to install approximately 25 to 30 POET systems per week. And the contractors collectively continue to indicate that they believe all the POETs can be installed by the end of this calendar year. So that's the schedule that we're on. As described in the previous work plan for the installation of the POET systems, Saint-Gobain is responsible for confirmation testing. We've talked at previous meetings about some issues with detections of PFOS below standards, but detections nonetheless in some of the confirmation samples. To date, approximately 109 POET systems are considered officially complete, and the reason there's not more is because the rest of those, there's still concerns with getting, either they don't have their data in yet, or the data shows detections of PFOS. And I won't go over it again. I'll keep this text in the update, so if people want to be reminded of it, they can review it. But in essence, they have detected PFOS in the immediate downstream sample from the cartridges from the GAC. And there's a belief that perhaps a valve or some kind of fitting may be responsible for that. We're still doing some work to sort that out. They've been able to demonstrate that that's not being translated to the system by doing some samples at the kitchen tap. But they're still going to need to reconcile this. Their compliance point in terms of their ongoing maintenance of these systems is at that midpoint between the two cartridges. So they're working to get this reconciled, and hopefully we'll have some updates for you on that in coming meetings. Let's see. Also, excuse me, on July 1st of this year, Saint-Gobain started their POET system rebate program for eligible homeowners. And according to Saint-Gobain, the program will provide a one-time rebate of up to $5,000 to homeowners deemed eligible who installed a POET system at their property to treat drinking water for PFAS prior to being offered a system as part of Saint-Gobain's POET installation program. Details on the rebate program and a downloadable form can be found at a website. I'll put a hot link in there. The website, for those who want to know it in real time here, I can certainly send it to the group. It's https://sgnh-poetrebate, POETREBATE.com. So that's you can go to that website, and there's text there about how the program works, and there's a downloadable form that you can use if you want to make application to the company. So again, there'll be a hot link to that in the minutes for this that are provided to the clerk. So on to waterline connection. The waterline connections for existing locations where we have nearby water systems are proceeding a little bit slower than we anticipated this summer. Saint-Gobain is proceeding with design work for waterline installations for the towns of Litchfield, Bedford, and Merrimack. These are areas with existing water lines where home require connections to the water mains in the street, and also some areas where new water mains will need to be installed. The design package for water main extension and service connections in the Hillcrest Road area of Litchfield has been completed, and bids have been received for this work. Contract documents are currently being drafted by the water utility and will be reviewed by Saint-Gobain. Construction for the water line extension in that area is anticipated to occur later in the summer, with substantial completion being made this winter, depending on contractor and material availability. Final design packages for the connections to existing water mains were submitted to the utility providers for the Merrimack and Bedford areas, and comments from the utilities are currently being reviewed by the company. SG has indicated construction for these areas will go out to bid this summer, and their consultant is nearing completion of design of the MVD water line extension project in the Wildcat Falls, Brenda Lane area of Merrimack. So moving on to the same topic in Londonderry, Saint-Gobain is working with a water utility and currently evaluating the feasibility of water line extensions in the town of Londonderry. You may recall that in their original proposal to the agency, in very round numbers, there are about 500 homes in Londonderry where they have a responsibility to provide alternate water within the outer boundary. And about half of those, about 250, were identified provisionally for a water line connection, with the other half being offered POETs. And so that evaluation for that water line group is still being completed. We actually did request a copy of the feasibility work and study that Saint-Gobain, that Pennachuck did at the direction of Saint-Gobain, and we hadn't seen that. We actually just got it yesterday. So we're looking at that, and that will be, we don't have a link for that yet, but by the time I provide these notes to the clerk for this, there'll be a hot link to that document as well in the notes. We have met with Saint-Gobain and Pennachuck in June to discuss the findings of their evaluation. And we're really engaged currently in active discussions with both of those parties to try to finalize an alternate water remedy in this area that's been identified for water lines. There's been some concern that was expressed regarding the availability of adequate water supply in that area, and also some tax implications for the utility based on extending significant water line extensions there. We think we're working that out. We're still working on that. But then once we do that, we want to be looking to the company to finalize their plans to put in water lines. So that is not reconciled yet, but we are working actively on that. On April 6th, DES received a letter from Saint-Gobain that proposed to delay submittal of an application for groundwater management permit until completion of a second set of PFAS samples from all drinking water wells at the site. We concurred that a confirmation sample from all drinking water wells would assist in delineating the boundary of the groundwater management zone and developing the long-term monitoring plan that is required under the groundwater management permit. So we issued an approval letter in early May and requested that the application for the permit be submitted to DES by May 3rd of 24, so a year later. So Saint-Gobain's consultant has started collection of the second samples in June, and they expect it'll take 9 to 12 months to complete all those. That's about 900 samples they've identified. And we think we don't have any data from those yet, but we think that the data from those would be, well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I'll talk a little bit in the next section about that. So we have periodically received updated proposals from the company to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree area. And following the initial agreements in April and June of 22, that includes the November 16th agreement that provides waterline connections or POETs to 44 additional properties, a February agreement that provides POETs to 11 additional properties, a March 13 agreement that identifies 3 additional properties, and a May 10th agreement that provides POETs to 4 additional properties. We expect that they've indicated, the company's indicated that they will propose remedies for newly identified AGQS violations concurrent with the bi-monthly reports that they submit to us. So going back to this water supply well sampling issue, Saint-Gobain, as you know, presented a work plan for residential well sampling and 17 addenda to the sampling plan relative to the 2019 ambient groundwater quality standard. And that was submitted on March 3rd of 2023, the 17th addendum. We approved that addendum on March 23rd. Saint-Gobain's consultant has been retesting wells with PFOA results between 10 and 12 and sampling additional wells within the consent decree area. Results from the initial resampling of those wells between 10 and 12 show that about 30% of the homes tested increased and 29% decreased, and about 41% remained around approximately within 10% of the original result. So their consultant started the effort to collect a second set of samples from all wells that were previously sampled. So these would be the wells between non-detect and 10 parts per trillion. And that work is proceeding. Again, there are about 900 wells. They have collected about 100 so far. They expect it to take 9 to 12 months to complete them all. and we don't have any data yet from those, but we're very interested in what those look like, and we're anxious to see what kind of results we get. And as soon as we have some numbers on that, we'll let you know what we're seeing. We continue to express to the company a need for an additional sampling addendum to complete sampling of all the water supply wells within the consent decree area. That would include the ones they've identified as being within buffered areas where they believe there may be another source and they have failed to sample. We reiterated that in a letter dated June 22nd and required that they complete that sampling. And we requested confirmation within 30 days from the company that they will proceed with that sampling effort. So that 30-day period has not quite yet run, and we'll have an update on the results of that once that occurs. So on to some of the statistics. As of May 31st, and this reflects the it's updated to reflect Addendum 17, 3,845 properties have been identified for sampling. That's the same as the May report. 3,833 access agreements have been sent, and this one more than May, and that reflects a return rate of about 70%. 2,420 samples have been collected from water supply wells. That's 2 more than the May report. And 1,000 properties were offered bottled water, and that's 2 more than the May report. So there's a bit of a lag in pulling in new data, so I suspect that the next meeting will have some new numbers that are more significant than those changes. Since the May report was Addendum 17, we don't have a lot of change there. So on to site investigation. A remedial action plan was submitted to DES on May 5th. DES is currently reviewing this submittal and formulating a response. We met with Saint-Gobain and their consultant on June 21st, and they have decided to submit additional information following those discussions. So DES anticipates receiving a request for extension for a final wrap sometime this month. And with that, the update that I provide will include some of the graphics to show a bar chart showing the progress being made in POET installations. But other than that, that completes my my summary.
Thank you, Mike. Questions or comments? Nancy?
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Quick question. I think it was the last meeting. It might have been the one prior. Andy was speaking about the potential for reimbursement for POETs for those that installed treatment. And I think at the time we raised the question and it wasn't really clear, and he was going to follow up whether or not that was only for private well owners within the consent decree area who's who had the exceedances, that, or also what about the public water users who, because our public wells also had those same exceedances. Many people here did decide to put in POETs before we had the warrant articles all approved and everything to finally filter our main wells. And he was going to follow up with Saint-Gobain. Do you know if anything that happened with that? Thank you.
Yeah, and actually I did, the commissioner did receive a letter from the chair regarding that request. And we haven't got a written response prepared for that yet, but I will tell you, we've looked at that, and I don't think that is something that we're going to be able to require the company to do. So I don't think we'll be doing that.
Thank you, Mike. It just doesn't make sense. If whether a private well is contaminated or our public wells are contaminated, we are the victims of that contamination and had no recourse but to take on that additional burden, financial burden ourselves, as well as the health impacts. But it just seems that, I think this is just another example of a consent decree that really didn't take into consideration the citizens here. And I'm speaking on behalf of people that reach out to me and say, hey, what about, I heard about this rebate program, because we're talking about that here in Merrimack too. And it's what is the difference? They contaminated all the water. So why are only some people eligible for something? I mean, I'm grateful that this is being offered to to private well owners. But, you know, we were all stuck in the same boat, and some people just recognized the issue a little earlier on and realized that the best thing we could do was to stop exposure, and did the right thing, and again, are bearing the cost instead of Saint-Gobain for that. So again, I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the citizens here, how disappointing that decision is, and how disappointing it is for a company that's responsible for that to be able to make that decision. You know, again, it's like no seat at the table. So I mean, I know it's not you personally. I'm just saying that the situation is frustrating, and I'm speaking on behalf of the citizens in our community. But thank you for the update. We were wondering what, you know, if there had been any resolve, or, you know, what the feedback was.
I will tell you, I understand exactly the message you're sending here, and we're sympathetic to it. I'm not prepared or inclined to discuss the legal authorities or what have you, but I just can only tell you at this time, we don't have plans to ask them to do that. However, you know, I would just remind that consent agreement did not bind anybody else. If anyone who wants to seek redress on their own and I know there are limitations to that and barriers to that, but I want to make sure people understand that when we say we're not requiring the company to do that, it doesn't mean others can't take their own actions.
I agree, but I also think that the reality of that is individual. Again, now we've already paid for the filtration, we've paid for the warrant articles to, you know, to pay for all of the public wells, the other public wells, and then you know, we would have to come up with attorney's fees against a very, you know, it's inequitable. It's just, you know, okay. That's all I wanted to say, but thank you.
There are a number of hands up, and Gary, I think you had your hand up first.
Well, go ahead. I think the questions are germane to this topic, and I'll follow up. This is a little
Great.
different.
Mindy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a follow-up question to that. Mike, can you walk us through how that decision is made? I have other questions, but I want to stay on this topic for now and come back to the others. Can you walk us through how you just said we decided not to ask them for that? Can you let us know how that decision gets made internally, whether or not to even ask them for it?
I can only tell you that whenever we look at something like that, we talk with leadership and we talk with our council, and then we make a decision. And I don't think it's not beneficial to anybody for me to try to outline that here.
So your counsel being the Attorney General or some other counsel?
No, counsel with the Attorney General, right? They're our only counsel.
Lorraine?
I just want to follow up on what Nancy said, just to expand and give an example. You know, look at my household alone. Public water, we see the harm. Everybody feels this way in town. We're paying for water to be filtered, or public MVD water, substantial amount. Yes, we have some grants and some loans, but we're still paying for that forever, number one. Number two, taxpayers have paid for all of our schools to be filtered because we knew we needed to protect those children. And the community, you know, this is New Hampshire. We don't just throw money at, you know, things in these communities. We really do think about our tax impacts, as do all communities, I believe, in New Hampshire. And we consciously, on a very high percentage of voters, voted to do that at our expense. Then look at my situation alone. I put two separate systems in. The first system was recommended to me by people within the state, and I was not satisfied. It basically brought down PFOA and PFOS, did not eliminate PFAS, tested it several times, ripped it out, put in a whole other system at my expense. You know, RO in the kitchen forever, bottled water, let alone the harm, you know, to health and pets and everything else, you know, that never gets added into the equation. So I think in New Hampshire, you know, I do recall a meeting that some of us were privy to with the Attorney General a few years back, who made a statement that what they do in their office is really on behalf of the state as a whole, not specific to communities. When that statement was said to our faces, I thought that was very powerful, and I just want this on record. This is not a reflection on DES. I believe the previous assistant commissioner was at that meeting. And there's some phenomenal people in DES and DHHS who absolutely understand what's going on here. But this polluter is calling the shots. They are very, welcomed by the AG's office. And the citizen perspective is this is absolutely outrageous. I don't know that DES has the authority to plug for more. And then let's build upon the private well experience. I will speak for a resident of this town who is in one of the identified areas to be connected to public water. She put not immediately, but by 2017, the systems for private wells, you may know this, are significantly higher than the systems for public wells. Public wells, they don't give that work away. She put in all of that in her house to protect her family at her expense, paid for bottled water, paid for water tests and everything before she was offered bottled water. She is not eligible for this reimbursement from Saint-Gobain because she's on the list to eventually get her water connected to MVD water, where she will pay a higher rate to clean up the mess of Saint-Gobain. So, that's it. We get this. A lot of us here really do understand that. It's not right. The question is, what can we do about it? As a collective group here, I think we need to build a little army and put our voices together and send this message higher up the chain that this corporation has had more rights and been treated better than residents in this community and surrounding communities. And I think that is very important, to have that on record. Thank you.
Any other, Don?
Yes, thanks, Chris. Mike, I just to kind of stay on the same topic, basically, just so I understand, what is the retroactive date that is qualified for the rebate, Saint-Gobain rebate? Is that 2019? I can't remember what the date was.
I think it is 2019, yes.
Yeah. So I guess that's where the kind of the concern is the people who understood that they wanted to take action on their own, it seems to me that this should have been retroactive to the first reporting of the PFOA issue, which was back in 2016. I think would make more logical sense. I know, you guys are limited, you've made decisions, but I think the consensus, I would imagine, from everybody's viewpoint is it makes more sense to kind of be retroactive to that date. On that same topic, I was just curious, is there a vehicle of getting the message, that rebate, out to the public? I don't know if that's up to the local towns to do, or like, how's that message getting out to the people to understand that there's a rebate available for them?
My understanding in the first instance is that the company has reached out to everybody that they believe is eligible.
Okay.
And then also I don't know if it's happened yet or not, but we just had a conversation where we said we would put that link on our website, on our PFAS website, so that people would, who are going there would see that. And certainly it makes all the sense in the world for, town governments to put that on their website, or to send out, whatever messaging media they use to communicate with their citizens, to send that out there.
Yeah, I would think perhaps, with the tax bills going out, maybe it could be a letter or a little note put in there. Yeah, just to move on, another question I had when you talked about the remedial action plan for the Saint-Gobain site remediation. Is there any kind of public notice or public hearing or public meeting to present that, or is that all something that's going to be done without like any public participation? I know you guys did one for the air permit. Is there something like that going to be similar for the remedial action plan?
Yeah, I think there is no specific requirement in the law or the rules for that, but I think under the circumstances, we would certainly be more than willing to host a public information session to kind of present, the content of that, and then take public input on that. So and I think probably that, again, we anticipate we're going to get a revised remedial action plan, up to a year from now. And so I think when we get that, that would be an appropriate time to have that kind of a meeting and share that with people. So I appreciate that request, and I think that's something we'd be more than happy to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's going to be a good gesture to have the public be aware and provide comments. So thanks. I appreciate it.
Mindy, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to follow up on that other response, Mike. I know it's not something you wish to cover, that answer to that question, but in order for the public to understand how these decisions are made, so that they understand what kind of recourse they could take on those things, it's important for us to be fully transparent about these processes, not just to say we decided weren't going to do it. I think people need to understand how those decisions get made. So I have the following 3 questions. How many of the 2,420 that have been identified for sampling, how many of the people who have been identified for sampling have been sampled? Is there a list of people waiting to be sampled right now? And then 2, how many of the people who weren't offered bottled water who have been sampled are above the proposed EPA limit, the MCLs that EPA has proposed? And then number 3, regarding the 30% of wells who increased over the last year or 2, do we have any idea why that happened? Are there possibly precursors in the soil? I know they're not emitting PFOA that much anymore. They still are, but they're not doing it that much. What's the reason for those houses? Is there spatial distribution of those that makes sense, that we can determine why they're increasing versus the others who are remaining the same or decreasing?
I don't think we know the answer to that. I think that a reason for asking that is that, we never like to make a lot of decisions based on one data point, right? So, if you test above and we provide you with alternate water, that's one thing. But if you test below and then we don't go back and look, that's not a great feel for us. So that's why in the first instance, we said, well, at the very least, look at these ones that are close to the standard and retest those. And then also we felt that we really needed, for even those where it was ND the first time, we wanted a second data point. So I don't think we know the answer to why the variability, it could just be, as you know, you can sample a well, 2 days in a row and get 2 different results. It may not be so much that the water quality in the well has changed, but it could be, laboratory variability. There's a number of reasons why you might get a different result. So we don't really know the answer to that, but we know that we wanted the data. And I apologize, you're going to have to restate your other 2 questions because I'll make sure
So anyone, is there a waiting list of people who've been identified for sampling that have not yet been sampled, that there are access agreements in place? Or are they pretty much up to date on that?
Yeah, I'm sure that there are people who are waiting to be sampled, and I don't know what that number is, so I can try to find that out.
Okay. And then the other sample is, yep. And then the other question is, of the people who are below the current ambient groundwater quality standard, how many of those are above the proposed MCLs, the EPA MCLs? What proportion?
The 4 part per trillion?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and we can certainly get that answer. I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can get that answer.
Thank you.
Other questions? Gary? Thank you for waiting.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. Just as a point of clarification, and I think Mike has referred to this earlier and he alluded to it today on the POET systems. Once all the kinks have been cleared, what's the follow-up plan for testing long-term?
Yes, there is a requirement for regular maintenance and testing. Okay. I don't have the frequency and the details up at the tip of my tongue, but I can make a note to present that next time. That's helpful.
Okay, but there's a plan in place, though.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, I thought there was. I thought you'd. I just wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Any other questions for Mike? Because I will ask Mike at this point. Mike, can you easily determine how many people are on bottled water at the present time?
I don't know the answer to that. Someone may be able to. I can't. Not in real time here in the meeting. But yeah, I'm sure we could get that number from the company.
Okay. And I want to recognize Andy Fuller for his June 22nd letter to Saint-Gobain. I appreciate the tone of that letter and the depth of and professionalism in that letter. Are you going to be able at some point to, Jeff last year had given us like a bell curve graphing of the resampling information. Are we gonna, I'm just looking ahead to doing our annual report, and I think the resampling information is extremely.
I'm glad you raised that, because I did get your email about that, and I shared it with Jeff and Andy, and they couldn't remember what had been presented. So I just gave you an update, just the raw numbers, the percentages. But yeah, if there was there some kind of a graphic that had been presented before?
I'm remembering it as a bell curve, and one of the things that was interesting is at the extremes of the bell curve, they were pretty dramatic. This raises continuing concerns, especially as has been said here, where the air emissions have been radically reduced over time. It just shows the persistence of these chemicals.
Right. And that persistence is not surprising us, because we've understood for some time that we believe that these contaminants will persist in the aquifer for many, many years.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that you had, I will say, you had, based on what we understand, we had many, many years of deposition. And, so there's, the PFAS, the PFOA that was deposited on the land surface, gets retarded by organic carbon and certain geochemical conditions in the soil and certain soil types. And its pathway to the eventual groundwater table may be different in different locations based on differences in soil type, depth of unsaturated zone before you get to the water table, or even in places where bedrock is very close to the surface. So you get a very different pathway and timing, and we believe that there's very likely a sort of some centroid of mass in various places in the soil that may not have yet contributed contamination to the aquifer. So this story's not been written yet in terms of what this is going to look like over time. But everything that we've learned and everything that we read suggests to us that we are going to have, contamination in the aquifer for decades.
Those are good points, Mike.
Maureen, did you have your hand up?
Just a brief question, Mike. We've heard a little reference the last few meetings to the site remedial plan and site investigation. Do you have a time in mind that we could have a presentation on the details of what's going on for, the town of Merrimack a few years back wrote a 22-point letter to Saint-Gobain. I think it was 22 points, Dawn might remember, Nancy might remember. It was really about very specific things that we really felt were very important to kind of contain at the source. And there hasn't been much talk of this in the last couple years on a community level. So I think it will be really important for us to know at some point, where are we? What have the asks been on site, and what's the plan, for that containment, especially given the current PTFE formulation is in the GenX compounds, and GenX does have a condition of use and manufacturing of 99.5 or 99.9% must be contained. So we have the current and we have the past, and you've heard me say many times, we need to stop the source. So can we expect a update on, or can that be talked about before it's finally negotiated?
Yeah, so a couple things on that. So first of all, with respect to the remedial action plan, I may have misspoke before. We gave them an additional year to submit a groundwater management plan, or permit application, but we think that they're going to want to submit an addendum or supplemental information to the remedial action plan that we already received. And I think it'd be more productive when we receive that to have the kind of meeting that Don was asking about. So that I think is not a year away. I think that's something we'd be looking for that in the near future, in the next few months. And then I think at that time, be entirely appropriate and helpful, I think, to have a public input session and not just an input session, but a meeting for us and the company to explain what it is they're proposing to do. But I also want to draw a distinction that even if they could magically clean up, you can draw whatever line you want around the site proper there. If they could magically clean up every molecule of PFAS in that site proper, while it would be important and it might have significant impacts on localized groundwater there and or the river and stream systems there, it's not going to clean up the dozens of square miles of contaminated aquifer. So while it's important and it's part of what they're absolutely duty bound to provide an approvable remedial action plan for their site. This is a site like no other, right? I mean, so we talk about the site proper, the area where they may have had, in addition to air emissions impacting locally, also had more conventional releases of PFAS, chemicals. That's one thing. But because this is an air emission source, that distributed contamination over, likely, maybe 100 square miles in the end, right? That cleanup for that site proper area is not really going to have a meaningful impact on much of the groundwater that is in that area. It's really not. So it's important to understand that distinction, and that it isn't going to be practicable to go and remove 10 feet of soil from 100 square miles of land in southern New Hampshire to try to so unfortunately what we're really dealing with is managing that contamination, making sure people aren't drinking contaminated water. To the extent there are locations where we can do something more active, then that's great. But practically speaking, we're dealing with a groundwater contamination problem in this large area that is going to exist for decades. And there's probably not a lot, practically speaking, that can be done to mitigate that, other than mitigating people's exposures, as opposed to cleaning it out of the aquifer.
I'm curious why in Michigan, Minnesota, New York, various other sites come to mind. They are doing some degree of, I don't know the specifics of their site cleanup, but there's some attention to site cleanup. And I know it's, I understand the extent.
No, make no mistake. There are other sites, and this site would be in that category, where active components of remediation can and will happen, and they will happen at this site. But when you read about a big cleanup, I don't think anybody, I haven't read about anybody who's trying to dig up, half of a state. So that's what I'm trying to explain, is that it's such a broad area.
You understand that. Right.
Gary?
I'd just like to emphasize that this is a very complex issue, and the science has not been well delineated as yet in terms of, we're talking about the individual dynamics of specific molecules. And as I referred to last time, there's a lot of studies that show the synergism between different species of the molecules may be as important or even more important. So we're still in the learning loop of exactly what it is we can know to ask the right questions. And as we used to say in basic physics class, until you can really define the problem, you can never get an answer. And we're still in the process. And the work that Mike's been doing in his department is helping define that question or that problem. But the problem is just unbelievably complex and interactive between the parts. The soil dynamics plays a role, like you said. And we're learning this, and some of the questions we're asking from the end user, in other words, what am I going to tell my kid in the kitchen when he takes water out of the faucet, is what we really want, but we don't know how to mitigate it entirely. So I'm trying to add a little bit more dimension to what we should be considering too.
Mindy?
I just want to make a comment on what Mike just said. And, I kind of it just infuriates me that we because the problem is so big, because it was the air emission, source, we have to throw up our hands and say, this company polluted 100 square miles of southern New Hampshire, and we're going to just have to deal with that. That is infuriating. And I think that it makes me even more furious to think about they're getting yet another 5-year permit to be able to continue to pollute with chemicals we're not sure are safe. We don't even know what the levels are safe. We don't even know what they are. And we don't know what's coming out of that treatment system when the stack is treating those chemicals, what other byproducts are being created. So I think, this really underlines the need for this state to be much more proactive in preventing air emission pollution sources like this from being able to legally pollute our state. I don't know where, but I would ask the legislators in this group to really think about ways to rein that in, because this is not appropriate. We can't just throw up our hands and say, oh, because it's so big, it's such a huge problem, we can't really do much about it. So sorry. I just want to comment. It's not a question, but I just frustrated.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. I want to make sure that everyone here understands that I am not saying that just because it's a big problem, we have to deal with it. And we are working every day. There are people at DES working every day for the last 7.5 years to ensure that this company does the things that it is required to do under the law. And we will continue to do that. It's going to take quite more time moving forward to accomplish that. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that millions of dollars have been invested from a lot of sources, including the company, into water line extensions and providing people with safe, clean drinking water from public water systems and POET systems and the like, to ensure that people are drinking safe water. And that's been our primary focus from the very beginning. And all I was trying to explain to Lorene was that there needs to be a distinction drawn between what we talk about doing in the immediate vicinity of the site and managing the expectations of how much of an impact that's going to have overall. All the cleanup in the world, as I said, on the site proper is not going to solve the groundwater problem. And if we thought that there was a practicable or even possible remedy for that whole area of contaminated aquifer, we would be pursuing that in earnest. But at the end of the day, we believe that the most effective way to make sure that people are not harmed by this contamination is to make sure that they have access to clean, safe drinking water.
And also stop the pollution in the future.
Yeah, I have my own soapbox to get on that issue, but it's a national issue and something that has to be addressed nationally and can't be addressed based on state lines that are artificially established. To put chemicals in somebody's well is not okay just because they can't detect them or they don't know what they are yet. And it's, fundamentally an intrusion on the property rights of others. But that's obviously beyond the scope of this meeting and the state of New Hampshire to deal with. So thank you, Mike, for handling those questions. Michelle, your turn.
Sure, thank you. So I have a couple of updates to share with you today. So as you know, DHHS was appropriated $500,000 in the state fiscal year 24-25 state budget to support the Merrimack, New Hampshire Kidney Incidence Phase 3 feasibility study. As stated in House Bill 2, prior review by the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on Health and Human Services is required before these funds can be used by the department. The department is tentatively scheduled to discuss this appropriation at the September 22nd Health and Human Services Oversight Committee meeting. And next steps for DHHS is to establish a contract with an academic partner to complete the feasibility study. So we're working on that, and we are preparing for our meeting, our September 22nd meeting with the HHS Oversight Committee. And then I can also let you know that the department has hired Leanne Atwell to serve as the Environmental Public Health Tracking Section Administrator, which was previously held by Dr. Kathleen Bush. Leanne's first day is actually with the department is today, and she'll be joining future commission meetings, probably transition with her. I can talk to the chair on that. And get you a specific date as to when Leanne will be joining. Just to give you some background, Leanne is a professional geologist with a Bachelor of Arts in Geology and Environmental Science and a Master of Science in Earth and Planetary Sciences. She has over 15 years of environmental health experience, both in the private environmental consulting and public sectors. Previously, Leanne worked with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services and was responsible for developing and overseeing the Get the Lead Out of Drinking Water program. That's her most recently. And then a few years ago, worked managing and coordinating the PFAS groundwater contamination investigation in Southern New Hampshire. We're very excited to have Leanne join our team, the Environmental Public Health Tracking Section, and we will continue to explore opportunities for partnership with DES on environmental health work. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. Happy to take some questions. I do unfortunately have to drop off this meeting after my update here, but happy to take any questions.
Mike.
Yes, I just want to note Leanne did work in our shop and most recently worked in our Drinking Water Groundwater Bureau. And Michelle, I just want you to know she's terrific. And Brandon is out in the parking lot right now slashing your tires.
I know it was quite a delicate process. I promised that we can share Leanne. So.
Right. Michelle, I don't know if you're able, but could you just educate me on the process for determining an academic partner?
So
Is it
we're going through a contract. It will be a contract. We're working with our contracts unit. I can't really provide a whole lot of information during the contracting process, but as in House Bill 614 and as we testified, we don't have the resources internally to do this, so we will contract with an academic partner to do that.
Okay, and I guess my question is there going to be a public request for proposals to be submitted by academic partners, or will that be handled some different way?
We're exploring that now, so I can't really speak to the process at this point. But that's really our next step, is to explore that process.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions for Michelle? All right, if not, next on our agenda is legislative update, the ongoing activity or recommendations. And it's summer, and so the legislature's not in session. So I can just give a little recap of what I believe is going on. Rosemary last meeting mentioned that there might be some activity on new well testing and for PFAS contaminants, as well as disclosure for real estate conveyancing. And she has mentioned, I think in an email to all of us, about resubmission of a medical monitoring bill, and then a House resolution demand the EPA limit PFAS in products to only those with essential use, or where there is essential use for life-saving purposes and for military. I am rough drafting a statute that in the vernacular is called a private attorney general statute. It is a mechanism, among other things, for providing attorneys fees and costs for private, private property owners, which would include those on water mains, to recoup the cost in attorneys fees and costs, among other things, as well as remediation. So it would address those who have connected to water lines. The commentary that today reminds me that some of this goes back a long way, and it probably has to be retroactive, but I'm going to be working on that as well. And hopefully to advance something that will put the burden on responsible parties. Many of us over time have expressed regret that the financial burden is on the state and on individuals. That really belongs on responsible parties, whatever they may be, whether they're Saint-Gobain or TCI or a municipality, for the cost of testing and remediation. And so there are mechanisms in place, but unfortunately the burden is shifted from the responsible parties, and hopefully we can address that going forward. I don't know if there is any subcommittee activity, but we'll be expecting draft reports around September to get the communications subcommittee involved. Is there anything, anyone, Ron?
Chris, if I could just jump in real quick. Anyone that wants to submit an LSR, it has to be done between September 11th and September 15th. Those are the submission dates. If we want to submit any bills, myself, Nancy, let us know. We'll submit the bills, get them supported.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And the Senate has almost the same window. It's my understanding. Gary.
Sure. Also, if we have something in mind, but don't have it really solidified, we can hold a title. You can, and so just to add to what Ron was saying, we don't have to have a finished product. We can have OLS just hold the title for us.
Laureen?
Unmute. Okay. 2 points. One is I just want people to remind people we have some really good bills that are retained in committee, and I know we have many representatives who will continue to work on those and track them and really pay attention throughout the summer, which is very reassuring. Working on policy on state and federal for several years now, I have to note that in New Hampshire, it's been 3 years since we have passed, at least 3 years since we have passed anything in the PFAS domain that has to do with regulation. What we've passed in the last 3 years are bills that simply give funding to various pieces of this. Funding is important. I think we have ample funding support. Our federal delegation has been excellent. The state has funds. They've given to this. They know it's important. So we have to pay attention to the regulatory. The regulatory is where the pushback is consistently coming. Requests for amendments that weaken bills, and a complete dismissal of, in particular, the Senate for some reason. So we need to look at that. And I think the representatives on this call and any who didn't make it, who are part of this or watching, we really need to roll up our sleeves and work together and say, what's going on there. There are things we need, number one. Number two, I want to call attention to, on the federal level, a bill was submitted, a draft bill by Senators Carper and Capito on the EPW committee in Washington, which really disappointed me. It's about a 35-page bill, not 3,500 pages at least, so I could read it in one sitting. And it was very good about many pieces of water and all these things that need attention and community support. There was great things in this bill, but in the first few paragraphs at the front, the most disturbing part in this bill that I think negates most of this work is a definition of PFAS issue and a carve-out exemption for fluoropolymers. On the New Hampshire site and on the CDC and the EPA site currently, fluoropolymers are identified and listed under what is a PFAS and all of that. Saint-Gobain, that's what they use. This bill defines a PFAS or 2 or more carbon fluorine bonds, or state passed something that Rosemary Rung worked on several years ago, stating that the definition should be 1 or more. That is the consensus. So this is a very important piece for all of you to reach out to our federal delegation. I've talked with Senator Shaheen's office about this week, and the Washington staff also, because if PFAS is defined in a way that exempts what the industry has pivoted to, which is the ultra short chains and what they degrade into, that we don't need to know the alphabet soup. We know they're there. We know they're used in this community. We know it takes more of them to do the job of PFOA. We know that PTFE is Teflon. We know that polyfluoramers are PFAS. So this particular bill is troubling. And I want people to know, I mentioned on our last meeting that there is a group out there that's doing a lot of lobbying state to state, and their goal really is to look at, shifting to, oh, these are the safe replacements. A PFAS is a PFAS is a PFAS. We know this in this community, we believe it. Science, academics, environmentalists, NGOs across the country are in full agreement with everything that I said. So this is not just my, opinion because I've been burnt by PFAS. This is truly outrageous. So I want people to really know that it goes beyond, what we do here at our legislative body. We have to really know what's going on, and folks need to really give their opinions and voices and make the federal government know that you care about this and this is not acceptable, because this will impact us horrifically if this bill is passed, and it will benefit Saint-Gobain tremendously. It will allow them to say what they have said. Dawn and I have had them look us in the eye and say, you must agree what we're doing is perfectly legal. They'll be able to say that forever and keep on doing what they're doing, because none of this stuff is on radar anywhere if it's not legally defined as such. So I wanted to put that out there to all of you, and anybody who wants to reach out with me at any time for more information about that, feel free to email me.
Okay. I guess that's pretty much it. Our next meeting, I'm sorry, Gary.
Just out of curiosity, what was your response when you contacted the congressional offices? Lorraine, you said you had contacted.
I was looking for the mute, unmute, because I just muted and figured you guys had heard enough from me. I did get a general response first that said, oh, thank you for your commentary. Would you like to set up a call to talk further about this? So my email back was, I know you're very busy. Your time is valuable. My time is valuable too. If we are to talk about this, I want to be assured of your commitment to this important part. That's what I messaged back this morning or emailed back. I haven't heard as such. I CC'd, the other ones because starting in the Senate, it's not originating in the House. But Carper and Caputo have been very good thus far, and there's been a lot of good bipartisan work on PFAS. But the same as our state, when we look at the regulatory versus the funding, there's a pattern here. And the funding really does help the responsible parties, not just us. So I've engaged with some people across the nation to get in touch directly with the sponsors of the bill, and there's a lot of action forthcoming, and I will keep our delegation up on that work as I always do. So I haven't really heard yet what I really need to hear, and potentially in a call, I would expect to hear that. To me, that is non-negotiable. And maybe, they looked at all the good things in the bill and maybe they're like, oh, this is great. Or, they just said, hey, public comment is closed. I did engage some folks and have them write some pretty good letters for sign on. So it could be under their official letterhead, because my little voice is not gonna rock the federal Senate, I'm sure. So that's, that's where we're at. It's kind of in play right now. And this is crucial, how you define a PFAS and what is exempt is going to set the stage. We have 5 categories of exemption already. There is what they call passive receivers, who are hoping to, not have to do any CERCLA or responsibility, which they wouldn't anyways, because the EPA knows they're passive receivers. The EPA work is really going to get responsible parties. Sorry about that. I'm going to mute again.
If you could, I read some material, but I'll make sure I've read that bill. Could you give us the bill title so I can make sure I'm reading the right one, be on the same wavelength that you are?
I will send it to you. If you want, I will forward you what I corresponded to Senator Shaheen's office.
Okay,
so my comments
fine.
on
Both would be good, yeah.
And actually, Maureen, if you can email me, I'll circulate the link to everybody.
Okay, fabulous. I will do that.
Great. Our next meeting is on September 9th at 1 PM. So have a good summer and work on your reports, and we'll see you then. Thank you all. Oh, I'm sorry, Mindy and Gary, are you waving goodbye? All right.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.